16th today of February 2024. I'm not awake yet. I'm sipping on my instant espresso with cream, and I'll tell you, I made some keto ice cream yesterday, custard, and I had 2 hamburger patties pretty late. And it's not that I gained a bunch of fat, but I'm bloated. I'm bloated from the cream. And so if you're gonna splurge on something decadent when you are on keto and you're taking in some dense calories, know that just because you're not gaining fat or gaining weight, you are still going to be bloated. And the whole point is to find a good digestive friendly approach. But I've been doing resistance training 3 days in a row. What I did is I backed off my walking. I'm just about to walk again and do 5. Yesterday I did 5 miles. And I'm trying not to do these long, arduous walks like I was. But it's a skill. And you have to be skilled and work on your skills in order to be validated. Right? And it's tough because it really expresses your internal drive. If we were only told about reincarnation and past lives earlier on in our lives, we would have planned accordingly. We would have made provisions for that. So I'm starting in on a 5-mile walk. Weather's patchy and it's freezing outside around the Monterey Bay area, so I just do it inside. It's easier. I can drink liquid, use the restroom, eat if I want to. I'm not dealing with pollution. I'm not dealing with a crappy treadmill. Like, it may be one of those things that seems taboo because you've never done it or you're not used to it or you think this, think that there's a redundancy factor to it. And I'm telling you, at least for me, there's not. Like right now, I'm turning on the heater and I will turn that on for a couple of minutes while I walk. And if you can get 10 paces one way, 10 paces the other, you can turn it into what I've done is 4.5 months of going on 4 months and 3 weeks. So closing in on 5 months altogether. I don't have to wait, you know. And you don't have to wait. In fact, you never have to wait for anything. In this society, we're segmented into different privileged states. And what you think is just like some normal behavior, there's nothing normal about it. Normalized, what does that mean? And if you really add up how much somebody has to take in a given month in order to look like, I mean, even to appear poor, like a crappy apartment, a shitty car, right? When you add everything up, you damn realize that most people are borrowing money, but their actual expenses are like $5,000 a month, especially in California, I should add. I like to flush out my system when I get up. I've taken a few days off, and that always affects the metabolism as well. I've done 3 days in a row of resistance training where I just do full body. I do pull-ups, bar dips, push-ups, single arm push-ups, supinated rows where I'll use the bar dip and I'll be facing up and do a row. And I really like to study many different subjects, and then ruminate and sort of talk about what I'm doing. Sometimes they're more physics-based. Sometimes it's focused around nutrition and physiology. And sometimes it's more political. And in the coming weeks, I've got some resources coming in for myself that will allow me to display more of my skills. So I'm trying to get myself at 54 years old back into the conditioning, the machine, to express the knowledge base that I have. And one really important thing is to find out if you're a physical learner. You know, do you have to go through? So I remember years ago, and I'd see these trainers come and go when I'd work at different gyms, different spas, different clubs and things like this. And I'd see that certain people were being put down by other trainers, right? Gossip, which is what losers do. Like people who would like to be, you know, in the front, the leaderboard, so to speak, but they just don't have the inclination. But it's not even that, it's just they don't have the ability. And that a lot of people just migrate through life. Like there's this mind of migration, right? They're not exercising their will. And I'll get back to that, but when you exercise, you are exercising your will. And I find it very interesting that I'm going to go back to my prior, point that I was making, but most people don't exercise. Exercise is a concept to most people. They never have pushed themselves and used their body to actualize an outcome, like a particular goal. Even if it's a daily goal, performance oriented, you might have somebody who walked a few miles in their life. And then, the thing that they intend on doing is getting home and eating or going on some sort of fasting type of thing. But to them, it is a fad. It's not a lifestyle, I guess is what I'm saying. And it gets into the areas of a physical learner. So I was making a point prior to about some trainers, and I was a top trainer at a lot of the clubs that I worked at. That just means pumping out the numbers and getting results, right? And I would defend these people typically because I would see the ability, the skill set that they had to offer. First and foremost, themselves. Like if you can get yourself into phenomenal conditioning as a trainer, but you're not necessarily the most educated person or the most articulate or the most science-based, well, you're just not good at running your mouth, but you're good at training. And so I remember this female that was one of the few good female trainers, and I'm not saying that a female can't be a good trainer. It really is how society is set up, where females have to pass some sort of weird witch initiation with other females that's just toxic, and then they get into this thing where when they learn how to express themselves, then they have to kind of throw on the baseball cap and pull like something about Mary bullshit, right? Where they're hanging out with the guys, and that's not where they want to be either. In my assertion, it's more like Michel Foucault, right? Nietzsche. It's like there is a male component to all linear behavior, right? And it's not a macho male component. It's not society's surface or superficial male component. It is a true masculine. I should use the term masculine. It's masculine. It's willful. And it really gets into Friedrich Nietzsche, where it's like all linear motion, all direct motion is masculine in its nature. You know, that's why women who use masculine energy tend to take on more masculine traits, and then that's looked down upon, right? Yet when you get into the women's suffrage movement, when you get into the areas of respected females in culture and society, they're always repressing through social conditioning. They're trying to appear a certain way, but you can tell that they have to be overtly bold in all areas, and then that throws off the psychology of a person as well. So I'd back up certain people, and this one gal, she was like in top condition. She was very, very masculine, if you will, in the sense that she was extremely lean and very driven as a trainer, but couldn't speak that well, and even said that. And it's like, well, you're doing it. You're training. Like, so every single session that she would train people in, she would be working out at the same time. No, I don't need money. Thank you though. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm content. Um, and I didn't even know that I was live, to be honest with you. So, like, I knew I was live, but I didn't know that I had made it public. I thought I was going to do a private one. And it's not that you're not invited. It's just that I use this sort of to document my walking sessions, my workouts, things like that. But I would post it up later anyway. And I typically do this on another channel of mine, and then I'll use the footage for another channel. Like, I'll go in and do a screen reader edit, which I haven't done yet. I have like several months backed up where I haven't done yet. So I wake up, I flush my system out, I do coffee, I get a few miles in. I think, am I, feeling good enough to do some resistance training? No. But thanks for the offer. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, I'm not I am a numbers focused person. Like, I would do really well in uh, every gym that I'd like. I'm a person who will go in there and sell a package for 42, 45 sessions, whatever the higher number package is. First day I'm working. The problem is that when you start to understand how neurolinguistic programming works, and the fact that what you really want to express is to be able to relate the truth and the skill set that you have to, like, are you connecting with another, hi, Steph, and are you connecting with another individual, and how healthy is it to connect to another individual, right? And you get to the fact of individuation, of being autonomous, right? So it gets very philosophical. And I always like to route people to Gorgias, Socrates, right? Discourse, the Republic, and that it's not over your head or anyone else's head, and that you can get this on video, on tape, and watch it even if you don't want to read the information. It used to be that these books, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, these books were just everywhere. Like I remember them, there being copies laying around everywhere, and I'd be able to read them, and you almost take it for granted. It's like for a long time, it was like these were almost like dime store books where there'd always be something laying around at the laundromat or wherever you were, you know. And so it gets into the areas of skill set, how important it is that you focus on, you don't think you have value. Nobody does. Everyone in this country, the US, is conditioned to think that they are really valueless sort of animals that are lucky to be alive, unless you're raised in a family of privilege that doesn't understand the globally the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who had to give their privilege and their lives up, right? So it's a lot of luck, past luck, right, with certain people. And don't get me wrong, the harder I work, the luckier I get. That's always been a phrase that I really liked. And it's true in America. The harder you work, the luckier you get. And it's still that way today. But you're dealing with de-dollarization that's exposing the dollar for the fraudulent Ponzi scheme that it's always been. Print off more money, create a false labor's market demand, right? So you have all these different programs going at the same time, but mainly it's to serve feudalism. You know, it's basically writing a rain check. Like each of those notes is really writing a rain check for a labor's market that never delivers. That's essentially what's happening. And so to protect yourself against everything, when I say that, it's not financial protect. You're not protected when you're financially protected. I don't care if you have a huge stash of gold at your house in a vault, the secret vault. You're not protected. I don't care if those are in the conditioned state of Valcombe bars where you can break them off and trade them. Like if you are fat and old and have no skills and aren't able to move your body, right? Or you just aren't conditioned enough to think on your feet, how far do you really think you're going to get? Like you're going to be paranoid carrying that 45 around with you, and you'll probably shoot your foot off at the first sign of any anarchy, you know? So skills and society, right? And you see people doing this. Athos is a good channel to check out. If YouTube were around when I was a teenager, I was so driven as a teenager. I was training, cycling, like I live, I was raised around the Monterey Bay area in California, and I would work full time. I was a straight A student doing school at home, and I was really excited about what I was doing, starting my own businesses. I had the high school football team coming over and using my equipment in the garage, and what a difference it would have made. And there was a missing element there, and there has been. And I was one of the first people back in 2007, 2008 to get on this forum and start documenting my life. Like, so that's kind of the approach. It's like the old school YouTube is my approach. Long story short, way back in the day, I met somebody who was, it's too personal to like talk about. Let's just say she did all this pre-screenings for YouTube, when people used to just send videos in, right? Way back when, way back when. We're talking like 2006, right? When Hurley and Chen. So she was involved with that entire process. So I had signed on and started using YouTube like way back in the day. We're talking like 15 years ago, and posting up videos about my training, my lifestyle, and I would get quite a few views, but I didn't understand that there was any monetization involved with it. So when I started putting other, as the years went by, when I started putting other more informational based videos, I almost hate calling them videos. I mean, they're like digital captures. And I'm kind of getting around to it because I'll be turning this station into a little bit more um, high tech station in the sense that I'll be doing like a little more 360 cam stuff. I'm looking at getting some Insta 360s. I want to get like two of them, but I'm not sure which two I want to get. The Ace looks good. I need something durable, and then the Go also looks really interesting because you can clip on to your shirt and take it along on runs or take it into the gym with you, whatnot. And I want to do more like action based stuff. And so the skill set that we have to express ourselves is very important. And, people need to be like in a moving environment situation. Like right now, what I'm doing is waking up very slowly, obviously, oxidizing, getting my blood flow up. And I'm going to be going into the other room and training some shoulders and doing some side laterals, front delt raises, rear delt flies, and probably some jump squats. And then we'll see from there. I trained full body yesterday, the day before, and the day before that, which is something that I really believe in, is like systemic exercise, right? But I'm doing keto, and I've been doing keto for several months now. But for a while, I was cycling my carbs. I was going on and off, just eating very healthy, higher fiber carbohydrate sources. And it's a completely different experience doing like super compensation is what they call it from a sports nutrition term, to do like full glycogen loads, right? To training or working out and burning those calories off and trying to convert that into usable force, right? Momentum force, moment arms, vector resistance, overcoming a resistant force, right? With speed, agility, and power. So I'm kind of working on my agility phase. I'm phasing into that right now. And that means doing more real world type exercise movements that'll be going on the beach, working in sand, running. I want to do some 10Ks, things like that, and hitting a couple of gyms probably in the Northern California area, because there's just nothing around here. Like the energy around the Monterey Bay is really bad. People think it's beautiful, and it is when you go around like the Asilomar area or Carmel Beach or Pebble Beach. It's a great place to visit, but when you live in a place like this, there's like this, it's kind of like living in an old folks home. It's like there's a morbidity factor that you can't deny, that you always feel present, you know. I'm sure not all retirement communities are like that, but it's a general contention that people are looking toward a sort of retirement status. And when you get into that, you're yielding to death. You're yielding to a falsified concept, right, of a future that is very dark and bleak. And there's so many stereotypes that are being abolished and destroyed. Youth is something that you exercise like an elixir. You are exercising that and creating the concoction through your own physiology, through your own HPTA, you know, hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis, and the excretions from your glandular systems brought about by neurohormone prompting, right? A good solid diet, good exercise routine creates a really good state of mind. Shout out is Hazley. Sorry, I'm not looking at you hard. My eyes are really bad. Yes, how you doing? Hazley and Steph and Joe, peace be with you. Talk about a wider range of topics, right? What wide range of topics. I'm having a hard time communicating today, but my brain, I think, is going to be functioning okay. um, my personal interests changed a decade ago dramatically, where I started to see. I'm gonna tie my sweats. I got a couple pairs of sweats. It's a little cold today. I'm doing really good. Um, I hope you're doing well. I am kind of doing a workout. Um, I'm just slowly easing into a walking session right now. I'm going to close this actually, even though I need the fresh air. There's like people who live like right out there, and then I can't hear. Awesome. Awesome, Hazley. Good to see you. And I apologize for the disgusting slurping and stuff, but when I wake up, I'm very dehydrated. And being on keto, you tend to get dehydrated, but I'm very acclimated to a keto-based carnivore diet nutrition plan at this point, and I'm just like I'm a success on it, like as far as my own personal success, not like a braggy success with any hubris. It's like I've lost 80 plus pounds, but I never should have gotten there in the first place. So I'm just kind of like acclimating to the fat adaptation aspect of okay, I'm doing pretty well on this. I'm down to 158, 159 pounds at 6 feet tall with a medium sized frame. But I've got a saggy skin from being old, so I don't let insecurity work on me, and I don't let that seems like something like that's easier to be said than practice, but I practice principles. Esoteric Principles of Light.blogspot.com is something I've been running for the past decade. And it all comes down to faith, love, hope, mercy, compassion, passion, trust, duty, honor, union, grace, temperance, and care. I'm 54, old. Hello, Darren. How's it going? And welcome, everybody. So I started to notice how I'd always noticed this, but I thought it was in my head, like a lot of people, how forces seem to come into people. more so how most people could view this from a broader scope is that environmental changes occur, whether or not you experience this as something you call tinnitus, where you have kind of like this ringing in your ear or your head, or you're in school and you just get fractionated and you can't think, or some people just outright start hearing voices, right? And there's sort of a disruption in the harmonic octave tone of people feeling like it doesn't take much to break the continuity of someone's personal homeostatic balance, where they feel comfort, they feel comfortable. You could look at it like their dopamine and serotonin and adrenaline is perfectly acute to their chronobiology, like the natural excretions that we go through. And it's more difficult to keep that homeostasis going environmentally than people in a culture such as we're living in right now feel comfortable with, right? In other words, you skip one meal, you don't have a place to sleep one night, your entire world is turned upside down, but more so your physiology is turned upside down, right? Your base circadian rhythm is thrown off. Your amygdala starts to respond. You're producing more brain histamine, right? And you start to think and act and react differently. And I hate to like jump toward the esoteric, but that's what this channel is, right? There's a hello, Jack. There's a cymatic influence. Can only be referred to as cymatics because, again, you hear this sort of ringing, right? Tinnitus type ringing. You the more sensitive you are, the more aware of tonal interference, right? So it doesn't get into electrical interference in specific, but I believe that that's one area where certain types of people are more sensitive to those more environmental interference. And then you have others who are more, I would say, they're more like you have people who are more kinesthetic, they're more physical, right? They feel sort of a physical in fraction from a heightened state, a heightened sense of awareness, right? They're more sensory based, right? And then you have others still that are empaths. That's what I'm trying to get to. Empaths, right? I'm an INTJ through the Kiersey temperament disorder is my personality. I even took that test. It's like a 100-question test. I don't know if you've ever taken it. Um, oh, thank you. That's just my good side. Yeah, and I'm sure, Leanne, you're a beautiful lady. We must shine within, right, and be our best selves. And it might look like I'm depressed here, but I've been doing this for 4.5 months. I have that up there just to be able to. There's a lot of there's businesses out there. There's like a restaurant, and there's a little alleyway right here. So a lot of traffic actually, and I'm about a quarter of a mile away from the ocean, so I can actually hear the ocean waves coming off the Pacific in the Monterey Bay area. Really beautiful area if you're not familiar. Um, and so, just this last year, I've seen, and this is part and parcel to the disclosure, but I'm not a person who's ever been overly focused on UFOs, UAPs, ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicles. Stephen Greer, I've always looked at that stuff as just another operation to mess with people's heads. But I'm not saying that there's no validity to it. What I am saying is I've been aware of what could only be considered like a demonic presence. But then, so this gets into Nathaniel Gillis's work, Barry Fitzgerald's work, Steve Mira, people that are studying a phenomenon. And if you're not familiar, I think that it's pertinent, paramount, very important for most people to look into this and digest it in your own comfort, right? In your own space, in your own autonomous space, to be able to approach this, whether you're coming from a religious standpoint, whether you're coming from a more academic one, where it's like you've relied on rationalism and so far it hasn't disappointed you. You're on a good track. Kudos to you. I've been in that place myself, and didn't think I had a care in the world, had different careers, only to be met by this force where you walk away scratching your head. And most of the time you can't walk away because it's happening, it's intruding into your space. And it may happen in people, like, right, where people just change up, right? But it's not specifically centered on people or human psychology or human behavior, right? But the strange thing is it can be incited within people. And so I started to look further at this, where I'm noticing, like, what's the missing element with certain people who seem to become what I used to call force bots. They can be taken over in a millisecond by something that seems very malignant, maligned, evil, right? And the number one thing is when people don't have principles. And I used to use this term principles like everyone else, but I didn't understand them until I started to look at people who are more narcissists. That's real popular these days. But we all understand what those malignant, narcissistic inclinations are all about, right? We're educated on this because we simply just go on YouTube, look it up, and if we want to know something, we just ask Siri, and the information's right there. I mean, you're, in a sense, you're more educated than a PhD 20 years ago. Like, if you want to know something and you have a perspicacious ontological, entomological focus on learning something and understanding a process of an order of how to break apart, like from a what's considered a doxastic point of view, where there's just multi tiers. You could almost look at it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Needs to be looked at more in a three-dimensional scope. And Maslow, near the end, he added to the top of that pyramid transcendence. You'll see these amendments in people's work, you don't necessarily need to go as far as C.S. Lewis, but you could, because from what I understand, Michael Segru, the great philosopher, the professor in philosophy that just passed away last month, someone told me he became Christian near the end of his life. And when you're talking about somebody who is read, who's so well read and has done so many lectures on, like, I think a really good book to point out and to say this one is a definite read, but you better really have an understanding of what you're getting into. Moby Dick would be one that's really widely available, but the Blood Meridian, and how Michael Segru talks about this discourse of like there's so getting back to Nathaniel Gillis's work and directly tying that to those two books, there is an undeniable theme of malevolence, but a very focused and feudalistic, narcissistic control personality involved there, right? Where it's almost like opportunity, preparation meets opportunity. There's different sayings, but it's like you have somebody who must have prepared to take on a certain muse type energy, or you could even look at it like L. Ron Hubbard's, Dianetics. You could almost look at it like you're inviting alien entities from a mimetic standpoint. That is, you're starting out a process through a certain application that could only be called satanic with anti-principles. You're practicing these things. You're seeing the physical outcome of sacrificing another person. Let's just be straight about this. If you have a parent, if you have a friend who sacrificed you, you're watching it happen, and you're the physical embodiment of what is being sacrificed, but there's someone in you that is very rationalistic and seeing things, learning things, right, as the observer, right? So it gets into other areas that you could go off on a tangent with Lee Smolin. Different, like there's AB time, there's thick time. These are more physics type concepts or ideas, but they give us that doxastic view of being able to look from a different perspective, go back to the axiom of a very clear and concise conditioning aspect of things that we notice through our own personalities. Like it's still you, it's still your psychology, it's still it's like you are a moment in the harmonics of the universe that is part and parcel to your genetic code. We're going to get a little air circulating in here. The harmonics that are going on, and all the way down to your molecules, cell structure, on into the macro view with celestial bodies. Everything is resonating and giving off a tonal frequency. And when you get into more ominous areas, you start to see how there's like this sort of drop, this depressive notion. You could go by way of looking at a postulation about the solfeggio notes, PHI, phi or phi formulation, the Fibonacci. And you could see this breakaway from a harmony that's occurring, right? Where you feel that harmonious energy. And when you go into, when somebody just says, close your eyes, take a big breath, relax, right? And you get into this place where it's undisturbed and you really can relax and you don't feel any sort of threat around you at all. And you're lucky, your physiology allows you, right? You've had enough food, you've had enough rest. We take those things for granted. And one day soon we won't. That's what war unfortunately reminds us. And you get to this place where you start to hear a certain resonant sound or frequency that is either trying to challenge you and disturb you from that, tranquility that you can't always break through. Sometimes you can, right? Sometimes you have this electrical interference, but other times when you can do that, you will start to resonate and hear, not necessarily with your inner ear, a certain harmonic tone that just sets everything right, right? And you could even go as far as to say you start to feel here, right? It's like a combination, a sensory combination. You feel here a voice, but you don't necessarily hear it, right? But you feel inspired by be calm, be relaxed. That's often, looked at from a more Freudian perspective where you have the id, the ego, the superego. But then you can get even more detailed and more intricate into that with Carl Jung's work, right? Get into the anima, the animus, the shadow self. And it goes beyond that, because when you're really looking for self and selfhood, the only way to get there is to embrace a more Hindu type philosophy is, and you get into the Vedas. There's a Sikh temple right next to here. You get into the Sikhist sort of philosophy, and you start to see, or a Buddhism, it's more Eastern Buddhism, right? Where you have this selfless self. The self is always evident. The self is always present. The self is always there, right? But it's not yourself. It's not your falsified self, but it is yourself, right? It gets confusing. So men like John Dee, who laid out the hieroglyphic monad, put this into an energetic symbol, because the monad has been used over and over again as a depiction. It's also called the mystic almond, right? And could very subjectively be the zero that we think phi or phi formulation starts out with. That's 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and so on, right? 89. And you get into this resonant number system that when you put that into order, miraculously it starts to create this tree of life, or this Metatron's cube formulation, right? So when you see those 6 spheres centered around a center, point, and then you start to see the mathematics that occur from that, and how sacred geometry comes into this. The pineal gland, all the things that you've heard about, right? All the things that you've heard about as far as centering yourself, but without will, without the application of just what I'm doing now, is where if all you can do is just get up and walk, over time, chronobiology, circadian rhythm, the resetting of your excretion, when we're talking about not just like your endocrine system, but how that affects your insulin, your glucagon, your that's for pancreatic function, how your blood stores, the circulation of your blood system, your liver enzyme levels, all these things start to come into this homeostatic interplay of balance and order, right? And we crave that, but we take that for granted at the same time, right? And when you start to exercise, just moving your body, you are, in my opinion, you are exercising free will. You're doing something in a way that is completely positive. It's not pangloss, like the word pangloss is more used for you're overly optimistic for no real reason. And you could say once you get the endorphins up, right? Once your dopamine levels are up, you start to get addicted to exercise. And that's even bad, because it's like you're going into this hyper realistic state where you will come down at some point. And some people, I have known them, professional athletes. I've trained a myriad of different people as a personal trainer from different walks of life, different focuses, too many to even name. But there's this conditioning level of, it's like the Olympian. You're being pushed to excel and to compete at such a level that if you were to, if all of your faculties were to come up to that level of the athletic prowess of being able to do any sort of human movement in performance at its current height, but you took your intellect up to that area, your heightened sense of alertness, you would overload. Your nervous system can't handle that. You would short circuit, right? And that's the secret program that's going on when you look at like Joe McGonigal, when you look at Colonel Alexander, the more recent interviews that you'll see on the Sean Ryan show, and abroad. They've done many interviews. Sorry about that. So Leanne, hi. Oh, thank you. TV Guide. What is your name? My name is Dean. Oh, that's your, I like that. TV Guide, hi. And so it gets into areas that are really interesting and important in the discourse of what we're talking about. And that would be psychical, telepathic. Some have even called it remote viewing. And that, like most names, most identifications, are creating sort of a telomere cap on something that can't be capped. Like the telomeres are on the ends of your DNA. How can you expressly say that that's the end of your DNA? Just because you can't see it? And so that is what these different projects like Men Who Stare at Goats, things like that, right? I chuckled just because of the name and the movie. I didn't even see the movie, actually. But it's real. The psychical ability, the ability to go outside of yourself, to have an awareness and an energy of all things around you. And that is part and parcel to the monad, to the experience that I'm talking about, where there is an attack and an invasion by outside unseen forces that come into what's referred to from Gnostic biblical texts. So you have the Coptic Gnostic traditions, the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, even the Gospel of Judas Iscariot could be loosely thrown in there. You have the Dead Sea Scrolls, but there's a certain writing style, that the Gospel of Truth, that many of these artifices, these codices, share, right? And they reference back to the pleroma, right? They use the term pleroma, which you could identify simply as the sphere, but we get into the areas of discourse around the monad. So you have somebody who's a very like beyond genius thinker, but almost afflicted, right? Like John Dee, who began to look at the discourse of everything I'm talking about, right, from a more theological sense, but looking at it mathematically, scientifically, starting to see the procession of the stars, seeing a uniform system, almost like a machine. Descartes, the Cartesian aspect of breaking this down into machine, right? And then now, of course, we're in a time with AI where machines and the questioning of the human body and how we end up getting here in the first place. Can you make me mod? I don't know what that is. And so, but hello, I hope you're doing well. And it's oh, like a moderator? Don't need a moderator yet, but I'll keep that in mind if I meet you again in the distant future, man, in the near distant future. Like I don't mind people saying rude things. I think that that's a hot button. I think it's normal. It allows people to break past certain pre-assumptive ideas of, does this guy have like bodies back here in a room or something like that? Or is there like, what is he doing? There's like this psycho analytical thing happening in the back of people's heads. And it's like, no, I'm transparent. But it's like it takes you a while to understand that. So you have to like watch me and then you begin to say, oh, yeah, that's Dean. That's what he does. Is he walks every morning, he ruminates, he rants about philosophical physics and theological concepts that pertain to a specific area of interest that is the area of interest of everyone everywhere. That's my whole point. Like the movie Avatar, what are you doing? You are the muse that's hopping into the body, the physical body, right? And you're seeing it from the perspective of we made you, right? So like what James Cameron is bringing to you in that is he's postulating we're the aliens. You understand that? Like his whole, like we are the aliens. We are the alien entity. It's like, no, we made those. And it's like, you didn't make, like, I'm sorry, I don't know the terminologies. I've watched both the movies, so I was apprehensive about watching that Way of the Water, but I was really happy after I watched it. And it's no different than the Hindu Vedas with gods. There's pretty much a god for every person. There's a god. There's like this muse. So you get into this trifecta, right? This triage personality, and the strange thing is it gets into the chiral. It's more of a physics term definition of the fact that where you have this sort of mimetic sequencing occur, that there is a third phase there. There's always like a third position. Like if you have two positions, it's almost like if you want to break it down and think of it in a simpler terms, you have Zoroastrianism's fourth proposed law to thermodynamics. It's a proposition because there are three, but there are more than one. Like Zoroastrianism wasn't the only one to propose a fourth law, but it's like wherever you have these two entropy-based systems, right, you're going to have a third. Like entropy doesn't cease. The thing that's going to create any concept or idea of equilibrium is that the energy has to go somewhere, right? Because you kind of get into this idea of male, female, and the inevitable offspring, right? People have to get bored enough, but these days we're able to bypass that. Like the discourse and the study of consciousness as an individual thing to say, what is this? I'm alive. I'm conscious. I'm looking around. I'm moving, I'm going through this cognition of moving my hands and like how much is there free will? And how prevalent is that in my life? And then we start to feel like we don't have that because this kakistocracy, this evil government is pervading over us. And then there's outside forces and influences, family members, people that we meet on the street that are highly negative, that pick up on the energetics and want to block us, right? And when you really get down to it, there's something that you're avoiding. And that is there is a definite energy, right? That is aware of you all the time. It's always watching you. It's disquieting. There have been many operations and many studies, and the CIA has admitted to doing many of these where they send out, let's just say, telepathic transmission to a wide variety of people over an extended period of time. And they want to know if you can pick up on a phone number and how many people pick up on that phone number and what the pocketed regions are. And basically, they're doing this sort of spiritual Doppler, if you will, where they're trying to see where these pocketed zones in the earth, you could call it torsion field energy, Meridian lines that occur in the human body around the world. Universally speaking, you could almost say it's sort of part and parcel in a mystical sort of way to like a string theory, a standard model, but it's really not, because it gets more into vortex mathematics, vortices, toroidal type energy systems, which is what's being found, and that these strings and strands are specific to the machinery that allows everything to work in a way where there's this bi and dipolarity that inevitably produces a strong and weak nuclear force, and that you could almost look at that liminal state when electromagnetics begins to drop off and there's still a pull there, right? You could almost look at that like that is 0 point energy, right? That's like the churning of this whole machine. That's one way of looking at it, you know. Or you could go back to black holes and vacuums and things like of this nature, right? But now that we have quantum computing, and there is an aspect to absolute zero, right? I think it's like minus 478 Fahrenheit, something like that. Theoretical absolute zero, where the postulation of the perfect crystalline structure could take place, right? So you go into this postulation where somewhere in the universe, or maybe beyond, because it's beyond multiverse theory, where it's almost becoming standard to assume that the universe has a beginning and an end, you know. I mean, in fact, they talk about that, right? Yeah, Project Stargate. Hello, Peanut GT, Kinetic, Zoroth, or Zoro, or did you say Zoroth? Zoroth. It's Zoroth with a TH. Yeah, look it up if you're interested. It's very interesting. Project Stargate. Yes. And so it's what we're all interested in. We are conditioned. I've got a pair of sweats on, and I walk and work out and do keto, and I ain't gonna lie. I got no ass to fucking keep my pants up. That's the first thing most people lose. Right? You see it with old folks like me. You see them walking and, and losing in the wrong places, but that's just a given. So, yeah, Project Paperclip, Montauk Project. You heard of that one? Philadelphia Experiment. All of these things are running an on-running program of consciousness. What that is, but they want to know how trapped they are, how much play there is available, right? And so you get into these areas, these black projects where all this money is going. And I stay up on this. So if you're, familiar with this type of stuff, please, yeah. But yeah, Lou Elizondo, Glowy Greer, and, all the things that are going on, Goresh, most mispronounced David Garush. You hear the most interesting pronunciations, but Jesse Michaels is a really good channel to look into. He really has a great perspective on this. Another good one is Through a Glass Darkly, and obviously like the Sean Ryan Show and Danny Jones. Just some of the more prevalent podcasts at the time. And so we gain this familiarity and this feeling of ease, right? And many people who want to take a shortcut, it's good for a little while to fall back on Jesus. I'm not putting Jesus down, by the way, but that's not his name. I mean, but if you want to call him that, you got to understand that you might be inviting something that was more of a Masonic production, like to take certain energies of the concept of a pure sun, or say God and man, right? And to pervert that into something else that is more of a social conditioning tool by changing biblical information, by changing the status of what's available to us. Like I started this stream out talking about how different life would be if we understood the codices that were left out of this Bible, right? And I'm not putting the Bible down. Someone even said, and I agree with them, is that the Bible is probably one of the most prolific grimoires that there is out there. In fact, there's you could get into a whole other field, but I believe the Bible is written in a codified sort of way that speaks to particular cult practitioners, like druids and witches and things like this, because people have a different concept all the way down to like a soul energy, like whether or not you were reincarnated, you still have a sort of an essence or a personality there, and you're going to see God through just the persona, the procession of the stars and who you are. Like there was a birth time, whether or not you were re-embodied or reincarnated, there was a birth time where you first came into being. And so if that's being challenged, where it's like, no, it was one singular consciousness that came into being, and there's no way to identify when that consciousness came into being, because it just basically folds back into itself. It gets into a spinner from a physics standpoint. It gets into spinner energy. It's very interesting because you have these sort of hyperbolic cubes, you know. How trapped they are. Yes, the simulation. So, and that's a really good point. And when you say they are, like you can identify it as we or I, but the freedom that you have is in the fact that I don't buy any of this shit, you know? And then it will try to keep you down by creating a secret self or a private self, right? Where you can see the time coming where it will try to proclaim itself as your judge and your jury. You know that it's going to happen, right? This is talked about. So I talked about this a lot in past years, which is, you know, the emerald tablets, thoth or thought. Thought is what that means. And I didn't realize, and so the emerald tablets, those things haven't been, like there was a whole historicity going on there where it's like ancient Egypt didn't even have the emerald tablets, and supposedly they were copied and the information was expressed. And you can get into, was Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus the same person? Most historians say no, absolutely not. There were similarities, but then you get into the Greco-Roman gods, right, and what they represented. But you start to see this reemerge over and over again. And I don't know if you've looked into Tartaria, but there is a very factual viewpoint at looking at this, and that is that there was obviously Stellium 7 is a really good channel to go on. Stellium 7. He looks at how petrification can take place rapidly, and that what appears as he studies like titans. A particular area of interest is where around the world he has people finding these petrified hearts, or rocks that have the same grain as musculature, right? Muscle fibers. And even looking further into it, some of these very well preserved artifices, rocks, things like this, that he'll find that have physiology to them, right? And some of these petrified hearts are undeniably, like, you look at it and he'll show hundreds together side by side. It's like, how the hell did that happen? And so he looks at it like the heart is the last thing, like when you're talking about invisceration or decimation. Decimation is like you're 90% being annihilated, but not fully. And so physiologically, if there was something to happen, like if there was some weaponry being used that turned everyone into rock, you see proof of this on Mars. I stay up on all that stuff. You see proof of this on Mars. You see these strange shapes, right? It's like there's some sort of death ray. You could say it looks like a nuclear explosion went off, but then you'd have to see an epicenter, like you could say like the craters on the moon are just way too neatly placed, right? But those aren't impact craters, and nobody really even knows how long the moon's been there. I mean, you could take samples, surface samples, like we've supposedly done, but when you look at it, like they say, it's just too perfectly placed. The symmetry is too perfect. There's no real asymmetry going on there. And I believe personally, like I have my own like weird things that I think about in the back of my head. And sometimes those things you can't just dispel them by current modern day standards of, like you look at Graham Hancock, right? Like the fingerprint of the gods, things like this. Randall Carlson, you look into these other areas of postulation. It's like, well, that can't be refuted. Like, I don't believe that the dinosaurs actually existed on this planet. I believe that there were at least 2 or 3 different planetary bodies that were put together that made up, terraformed the Earth, So then you have to ask, wow, that's a pretty big project. You get into like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy type of stuff, right? But that it's not out. If they can move multi-ton rocks around like they're nothing at all, there's got to be ways to tow and move planetary bodies, right, into position. And maybe that's what Oumuamua was getting at, right? It was taking data information of a trajectory, and taking in data information of rotational energies pull. Solar winds are, yeah. Wow, it's insane, isn't it? Yeah. Yep. So for so long, it was okay to say the moon landing never happened, right? And then they begin to backtrack on that, but it's got more to do with the things that Diane Pasulka talks about, right? It has more to do with the strange artwork that's put on those shuttles and those capsules, right? That there's a very cryptic, that it's more about the time meeting these windows and why launch dates and times are so critical, right? For a long time going around the internet, it was nothing really goes into space. If you fire a missile straight up, you're going to just see it go through this curvilinear aspect. And that kind of led toward, like, there's just this automatic deflection that takes place. And then that led toward sort of flat earthers, right? Thinking, and it's like, well, what if you weren't to throw away something like flat earth, but you were to start looking more at toroidal fields and go, there's an energy that could be circuitously, like you could almost go about a full pi circle on a disc, right, of existence, right, more of a two-dimensional, like what we're living in right now. But to say then you have many layers, and then to look at it like, well, how can you look at that as one disc? You need to look at it more like a corkscrew, and even more so, it's fluxing and moving, right? This field energy is fluxing and moving, and that starts to make more sense. It starts to make a lot more sense. So then you start to look at windows, right? Of when you get into Stargate, when you get into everything else, and you look at how there's a obvious shift light energy, photon collision interplay going on there, radiation, but there's also harmonics, right? I'm gonna sit down for a few. I think I did about 2 miles, and I don't want to go over crazy on the walking because I want to be able to work my shoulders out in a little while. Straight yapping, yeah, I am, but go away, Kenny. We don't want people like you here. Blah blah blah. It's boring, but I get more subs, and I'm always surprised. But this is my own documentation for my diet, my walking, my training, and obviously you're not interested, so bye, see ya. But yeah, kinetic. It is very interesting. So like the topics of the channel, I try to get into other sort of topics that I'm interested in, like kinetic. Like I really respect people who are focusing on what has been considered the liminal and is now looking more like this is how physics works, and this is really scary to think about, right? When you get into Lee Smolin, you get into these different areas of the fact that there's more than one constant in time that's sort of interplaying and inter. So, long story short, Nathaniel Gillis, Robert Bigelow gets a little bit into this in New Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mishlove, and I've been fascinated with Skinwalker Ranch, but I'm more focused on the personal experiences that I've had with said energies that could either be like Nathaniel Gillis calls them molters. They have been referred to as demons, muses, and then you have this whole alien disclosure. I really believe that this is the same, we could say entity, the same force that's going on, and passing through lives through the amniotic fluid. So we have amnesia, right? So yeah, one man's yapping sounds like to another person sounds like the sub thoughts that you have every single day. Some people are more interested, right? But yapping every day, you don't see that I'm walking. You don't see that I'm burning calories. You don't see that I'm on ketosis. You don't see that I have a skill that I'm expressing where in sports nutrition, physiology, anatomy, kinesiology, that I have skill sets to talk about and to teach. You don't see that I have a broader area of interest. So, you're going to reduce things down to entertainment. So you're probably sitting back fat and lazy on your ass, eating another Cheeto that's stuck to your nipple and thinking, entertain me. And it's like, no one owes you shit and you're going to have a hard time in your life, man. And so that kind of identifies your age and your social category. So when you say things like that, it's basically, I'm not interested in finding out what's the pervading truth of what's going on. Well, I am. In fact, always, all the time. Simulation theory, yeah. Yeah, that's something that I have put a lot of thought into. I appreciate that question. I believe that there's more than one on-running program occurring. I write about this. I've written about this extensively on Esoteric Principles of Light.blogspot.com. So I've been in a war, you could say a psychical war for the past decade. Once you start to challenge this, you'll invariably see, and if you have these questions, you've probably been through this, that there is some interference occurring when you start to exercise your free will, right? And so that's really the area of distinction when you're looking at a simulation theory. I don't believe that it's a clear-cut simulation. Like, long story short, I think that Nietzsche's flat time describes that you have to look into that, and then you look at Lee Smolens's AB time, thick time, these areas of time that like to say this is a prison isn't enough. I think that this is a dead pocket of a universe that's, and getting into defining what universe is, I think that we are almost like could be considered a fork, like if you're looking at it like a blockchain, right? And that the harmonics, the natural resonant tones that we all crave, the balance, the order is something that we can't achieve here, right? Because the constituents of what we're made of and what give us, keep us from being bad robots and just committing suicide. There's an archetype that we go back to, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad, right? We always go back to this archetype because we know that we can't achieve that. Yet, if we really knew that wholeheartedly, we would kill ourselves. There would be no point to live. There'd be no directive. What? How many people do you think have been through this process? So an on-running program that repeats the same algorithm over and over again, keeps us trapped in the algorithm, but at the same time, we have to pay homage to it like samsara, because the entire simulation would be done and gone, and therefore existence itself. Like, what's holding the carbon together? How much of a cymatic or an outside influence, the glue, right, is interplaying with the telomeres, the very DNA that we have, the resonant signature that is being sent off in a binary code, meeting the celestial harmonics, right? There's something that's off. So what we're always trying to do, like the big thing that I think Billy Carson really is trying to get at, is we need to get back to these natural harmonics. We need to get back to the solfeggio notes, the solfeggio tone, right? But once that happens, you would see very clearly that there's an entire huge sect of people who would take offense to that. You see, they're losing. I think that this has been a very intricate program, and that many people wouldn't exist if we went back to the harmonics of a solfeggio phi or phi based system of perfection and order, and that's always been a choice, and that the deployment and employment of narcissistic behavior is part and parcel. These people think they're being heroes in a sense because they're keeping the samsara going. They can't see. So it leads back to a biblical nature. Like, it's almost like, well, it's like, yeah, now that you understand the intricacies of how deep and ontological the story really is, that it is a battle between good and evil. It is. But the evil doesn't even have to exist. It's being short-sighted. But then you could get into this conversation. So again, the dialogue, if you look into the Republic, if you look into the dialogue between Gorgias and Socrates, where he is making this argument, this claim for liberty, right? Like, you can be liberated from anything. If you really believe in liberty, you can be liberated. You can liberate yourself, like what's happening now in the woke agenda. That's total liberty that's occurring there, right? But I'm not standing on one side of the pulpit or the other, so don't get me wrong. Versus, and liberty versus autonomy, but those who are expressly living behind the skirt tails of the Statue of Liberty, holding that, right? And you have essentially a man in drag, but that's not the end all. That's not the whole esoteric decryptor right there. But you have autonomy is being challenged. Your own personal autonomy, like if you're intellectual, you know that about yourself. You know how to regulate yourself with food and thank you. Yeah. I would like, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it, Kinetic. Yeah. So autonomy, you're an autonomous minded person, right? You are that, but the mind of autonomy is even more critical because it's like there's a mind meld that is being blocked where you and I and all the other people, right, who are expressing this internal knowing of a self, when everyone else challenges the idea of free will, selfhood, and then you realize, well, there's only one self because there's only one perfect, like, binary code sequence. Like, once you reach perfection, once you reach that fear fire perfection, then it's just flavors, right? Oh, we're gonna throw in a little flaw here on the 11th chromosome, the 9th chromosome, right? And the person will still have all their attributes, all their faculties, but it'll change them in such a way, and that's liberty, that's democracy. You see how it's a falsified form of democracy. And really what people are getting at is a selfless idea of the self, right? So when in theological standards, like Jesus expressly says, sometimes blatantly and in different ways, we will go back into our roots, right? All things go back into their roots, right? So I believe that the scary aspect of, say, Dianetics, right? These aliens that have blown up their original existence and hurling through space and require avatars, and it's like when they get into the concept, and this is what's going to come out with the disclosure in pocketed regions, right? And it's going to be that what's being popularized is the concept of we are the aliens, right? In other words, what makes us us? What inspires thought? What inspires intellect? Where did all the gifts come from? And it's like, do you realize that you would just be essentially probably not even an intellectual monkey, right? Without this inspired thought, and that came from an alien force or the exposure of an alien force. It's kind of like, what was that Nicolas Cage movie where he was exposed to a certain type of light and it started doing all these crazy things like morphing his physical form into almost submolecular, non-traditional, completely like Lovecraft, cyclopean, right, asymmetrical structures, and we look past the fact that our eye is always searching for this chiral positioning of symmetry. That's why supersymmetry is so popular there as well. I've felt that. Let's see. All eyes. Yeah, exactly. Like I used to tell my son, and this is many years ago, I said, it's as if God is this big, like if you were to look at this board that was almost like Swiss cheese, and we're looking out, right? Each of us as an individual is looking out one of those holes, one of those pocketed regions, and we can only see from our vantage point a certain aspect, and that's like our personality. And it's like you take all those views into consideration, and you have, so, but the term God, just like demons, just like angels, they become so overused. And there's been so many other references and names that have been used. And so that's the only thing through burnout that changes the narrative of the same story that's being told over and over and over again. It's like people, that's the whole thing about social conditioning, is to get us bored with reality. And if we could face reality and say, this is the mental construct that holds true, right? That I'm waking up this morning and I know how the universe works, what you could say, what my purpose is, right? And I believe that I found that purpose many years ago. And that's just a personal thing. And it is a personal thing, is in principles, that there has to be a principle. So blank slate infusion, you get to this place where you blank out every bit of bullshit that you've ever learned, and you start to infuse principles in them. I believe the one thing that's missing is purity and purification. And so those who don't understand that could stand on a pulpit and argue with that for eternity. They would, because they don't feel the purity. And so it gets into, like, if you were to say, let's put purity and autonomy on the same plate, right? And then when you really get to this place, you're like, I want to be pure, right? I want to be pure. I want to feel pure. I want to be purely, it doesn't even matter if I am the same person, and you won't be, right? And so it gets into the areas of CRISPR and things like this, because from I'm going to say a left hand path narrative, right? where we look at the right-hand path and the left-hand path. When you look at the narrative, it's like, well, let's perfect who we are, and it's like it's impossible to perfect it. There is no archetype because there is no. I'm curious what would happen if, like Prometheus, the perfect being were created. And I think that that's playing with fire right there. But what if a genetically perfect being was created? How would that affect the entire tonal frequency? And you start to see, I'm not going to jump in and say the 100 monkey, theory, but it's undeniable that the telepathic, spherical, resonant zones, right? When you get back into torsion field energies and things like this, where you could say certain particles, subparticles pass through, you have the whole wave meets frequency walls of distinction with a sphere, right? Almost to create a certain critical point that identifies the difference in shift, right? But then you get into the fact that some of those energies are traveling on, and it leads back into the flower of life. I believe that the tree of life is a disclosure of, you look at an addition, not only to the bottom, but sometimes you'll see an addition to the top, where you're looking for the symmetrical 6 spheres with a center point, and then you see an addition take place on the bottom. You see, right, different spherical energies, and it begins to look like blockchain. It begins to look like a fork, right? But it also gets into, you can't deny non-Euclidean spherical mathematics. You have to look at the parabola. You have to look at the convex and concave aspects of spherical energy systems and think not only in a 3-dimensional way, but in the, like, you get into the chiral positioning, you always have 2. What if you have 3, right? Bodies in motion that never stop being in motion, and how in the antithetical and juxtaposed position, the personality begins to manifest regardless. So what if you began with something like, from a thermodynamic standpoint, where you have the perfect crystalline structure, right? And then you start to look at this as a grand manipulation of light being refracted, trapped in, almost like that Pink Floyd album, right? Where you have the crystal and the rainbow coming out of that. I think he was really onto something there, but I had been thinking about that, and I saw the picture when I was listening to some music, and I'm like, oh, wow. And so it gets into areas of, if that's occurring and that is perfection, then what is purification? And we see that fire is often, you get into the high Kelvin heat, the plasma that's created. And so if you were to combine those two forces, and more so, they're combined in different gas solutions, you start to see things that look like you can turn metal into gas, right? So you start to look at different gas solutions, and you start to wonder, as you change the heat, as you change the gas, right? Is there a constant in conscious behavior? Entities can exist in the sun. Entities can exist in the coldest regions of space, right? Consciousness finds a way, right? So when they talk about the grand architect of the universe, right? When there is a critical program on display, right? And that there has been a positioning, right? So what gave somebody or some force the power to direct where the planetary positions would go. We're talking about like the postulation of engineering, of total engineering. And I believe that not only in ourselves, not only in this on running program, and I do believe in the simulation theory, but I don't think that that's all that's going on, right? I don't think that's all that's going on. And I've gotten really deep into this to where there's moments, which I'm sure you've reached, where I've realized the resounding truth, you know? And so what got me looking at principles is if you think positively and you only think about the most positive outcome, the only thing that's going to create any sort of continuity or outcome, what's missing? And it's like what's missing in narcissist principles, right? We're talking about what could be referred to as, my friend likes to say, godly principles. But even that's a stretch because it's like, how do you define what God is? How do you define what good and evil is? And it's like when you see the total absence of principles, if you've ever read Lovecraft, which I think his writing is amazing, but you start to see this total absence of principles, but even more so, how craft, mindcraft, fellowcraft, witchcraft, druidcraft, warlock, right? That you are taking on the principles of a certain practitionership. And when you go into this, what's called magic, you know, you get into this whole Crowley idea of getting into the mantra, the rhythm, and becoming an instrument, a vessel, a crucible for these energies, then it becomes undeniable. But then you have transmorphed and you have changed critically into something else, and you cannot just change back, right? Once you've been subjected to the light, once you have been, so people are aware of this, and we've reached a critical state. And so there's a choice to just keep going back through samsara, I believe. I believe people are more aware of this on a psychical level than they feel comfortable expressing. And once society becomes a place that's not, that we can't hide, we can't go to Starbucks, we can't go to Walmart, and, you know, we can't gorge ourselves mindlessly on foods that don't really taste all that good. Like, there's the concept of the fast food meal, right? That's a concept. But when you finally buy it, it's just processed meat, processed flour. Nothing is as good as it's portrayed to be on the surface. And then that gets into sex, that gets into all other areas of hedonistic indulgence. And you start to see how a more Epicurean approach becomes the way. It's like you're balancing that out. By denying myself this now, I experience more pleasure in the flavor, right, of these certain things. So I have to have some sort of prudence, a construct. But if you're even to take that even further and you go into these mental mind meditations and mantras, there is a definite block. I know this for certain personally. Could I prove it? I think it could be proven by the resonance of certain energies where when you're doing this remote viewing and you're trying to tap into certain energies, that you are being shut out from that phi or that phi formulation of perfection and order and harmonics. Yeah, I do believe that. I believe that it could be proven. Yeah, so I'm gonna call it but I really appreciate you. And if you have any other questions, or it sounds like, you know, if you wanted to get invited, I think that I could invite you on a live stream and we could talk about this type of stuff too and just shoot the shit. Um, I'm going to be getting a computer set up. I've got this omen sitting here that I might fix here, and then this is another one that's. But I've got. I'm going to be doing more video editing and more live streams, but it's going to be more focused on trying to do some screen displays, and then for my other channel, it's going to be more like Insta 360 cams and things like that. It's going to be more action oriented. I'm just waiting on some resources in the coming weeks, and I really want to be able to talk about this. The channel focus is I really want to hear what people like you have to say. Like I want to hear um, a broader scope of conceptualization, because the reason we even need concepts in the first place is for our comfort. And I think that if you could live with the fact that things, it like the truth may not involve something that releases you from the anxiety, right? That you would inevitably, like, your amygdala might grow a lot. You might be really, you know, that midbrain might grow a lot, you doing things that you are very uncomfortable with. Like, that's the whole point, is our physiology is based on constants and norms that don't exist. They are aphorisms. What you're trying to do and what I'm expressing and what makes us come together in this sort of mind meld is the fact that autonomy means that you are taking a very uncomfortable road where once you see the truth, now you have to deal with the fact that these personalities that I'm discussing are present in your family. They're people that you used to call friends. They're people that you see every day. And when you begin to become more aware of this because you're practicing principles, right? I'm not selling you on a religion. I'm not selling you on anything. I'm just telling you that there's going to be something missing and there's going to be a craving for truth, and that you can look at every religion and you may find the principles layered into the Bible, but there's nothing that says these are the principles that you follow. But I take the principles that, and when I say principles, it's not a lighthearted thing. It's not, oh, principles, not principles, a morality, virtue. This is not morality and virtue that I'm talking about. I'm talking about master principles of identifying those specific spheres with the phi or phi formulation, and to say that as emotional energy units that we're spinning by emotion, energy in motion, that just like that Swiss cheese, that board with all those holes, that each of us is looking through one, and that's kind of like the, that we're only able to see a certain smidgen of the totality, and that or we're exposed to the entire totality, and it's our interpretation from that view, but that you couldn't look at that like as a time and place to say, oh, in a juxtaposed position, you'll place all of these holes or spheres or block spheres, you know, um, side by side, and say that they have a definite personality or position. Everything's morphing, everything's shifting, everything's changing. We're about to find something that's the true grand unification where there's a master algorithm. I do believe that. I think that that may have already been discovered quite a while ago. Remember, we're at least 30 years behind mainstream, and then we're probably thousands of years. Like, look, 20, 30 years ago, if people were talking about UAPs, UFOs, you know, specifically that we had that type of technology, no one would have believed it. Now, it's not only believed, it's being indoctrinated into the new um, Unitarian system. A new religion is emerging. Yeah, a new religion is emerging. And so I believe principles become more important than ever, and the evidence of those principles in yourself. And so I got into doing these spin meditations, spin energies. I'll tell you what the principles are. The main macro principles are purity from a pure center, right? And you imagine yourself almost like you're sitting in a Merkaba and you're spinning these energies. I almost don't like to talk about it anymore because I'm influencing you by talking about it. And it's something that you find through your own personal discovery. So as I talk about this, there's no indoctrination, right? I'm not trying to indoctrinate you. You have like John D. There is This is what liberty tries to get away from. There is a direction. It is going to be to the right, a right-hand path. It's not the right wing and left wing. It's the right-hand path. You will have to choose the right-hand path, and begrudgingly, you will have to sacrifice yourself because you're not one that sacrifices other people. So in that, you're a vegetarian, whether you like, I'm a carnivore, right? But I don't like to eat dead animals or kill animals. Would I kill an animal and eat them? Depends on where I was raised, the time I was raised in. I'm not getting up on a pulpit right now, but what I am saying is we are living within death, we are living within sacrifice, and we are going through the rituals. And the first thing that everyone does in comedy, in entertainment, in government, think about it. The first step that's always taken is sacrificing your purity. That is the religion that we live by. And if you look deeper at this, you'll see it commonplace, concurrent throughout everything. So what they want you to do is think that you're using this Christian scope or this Christian, and it's like, well, maybe true Christianity, but it probably only loosely resembles what's being pushed out there in the broader mainstream, right? They wanted to pollute that as well, right? So they wanted to take the story that had been unleashed, and this is something I believe as well. Once information, like the seals, right, that's talked about biblically, and revelations in general, when you look at information that is introduced into the field through a time signature, when you look at the 23 to 27,000 year passing of the North Star kind of cycle, right? And the half cycles, like they say 12, it's like 11,000 to 14,000 year cycle, right? And you look at that, it's like 13,500 year cycle. And we are in that cycle right now. The younger Dryas, Randall Carlson, once information enters into the field from the reset that occurs, right? The binary reset, where the algorithm of the plates are shifted, the positioning of planetary positioning is shifted. Now it is a new planetary energy. Now it's reset. But how many times has it been reset? And so once that information enters back into the field, so this leads directly into Tartarian type of implications where you start to see that there's suppressed and missing time where people think that they're doing God's work. They think that they're the ones who believe in democracy and liberty in its falsified state. They believe that protecting family, protecting, like the master key system gets into this by Charles F. Haanel. This is the Masonic order. I believe that the Masons were a brotherhood that took down, you know, what is it, Og, Magog, David and Goliath, all of the giants. I believe that there was a conspiracy against what was considered the gods, and that the brotherhood came together, and that this is what Hiram Abiff is about, the toe rope, the brothers that were jealous of Hiram Abiff for his abilities in the building of the pyramid. That pyramid could very well be any pyramid on any planetary body. It doesn't necessarily have to be Giza, but it's looking like Antarctica and the South Pole pyramid is even more grand in the ones that are under. And so what this creates is a phi resonant tone as to keep continuity, right, in these certain torsion field energy signatures, where these structural perfectly this grand architecture of the universe, right, these perfect constructed and perfectly placed pyramidical objects, sacred geometry at certain ley lines would create a resonant frequency and allow certain energies to take place. and that those religions that have taken place that are now delineated in certain pocketed regions where people are focusing on a specific energetics, and then there is a tonal frequency difference between these said religions, right? That once that's dispelled and broken through, and there's that one religion that's talked about, right? Where um, it gets into principles, like it becomes undeniable. Like once we get down to the rationalistic scope of what what is the essence of what these religions represent, and it's like these principles. So then it gets into purity, sacrifice, expression, wisdom, community, production, ego, and then you have these sub principles that relay these energies. So these aren't emotional energies, so to speak, but they are, because it's from a kinesthetic and really from a nervous system standpoint. It's how we relate with these energies, and you have to feel the energies so you can move the energies around, right? You can dilate the energies. um, there's a synesthesia that's involved, a metacognition. Okay, so then you get into belief systems, right? Underlying belief systems: faith, love, hope, mercy, compassion, passion, trust, duty, honor, union, grace. And then you have temperance and care, right? That work almost like a subparticle delivery system, right? Um, but ultimately, you have to come to this place. When you practice these principles, you come to this place where a metanoia occurs, where there's this like defining cataclysmic change in your life, and that can only be called salvation. So you see how it sounds like I'm talking about very Christian themes and Christian terminologies, but I don't even come from that standpoint. I'm looking at constants of what occur, like what I'm looking for, meaning we're reaching a stage beyond enlightenment, right? So enlightenment leads to what? And it's like meaning. So then you get into the Masonic traditions of degrees. You get into how ratio, reason, and degree mean exactly the same thing. So you can, the G, the Freemasons G, you can get into God, you can get into like a grand human unification, you can get into geometry. You're going to see it from a different perspective based, but ultimately from those different traditions of spherical energies and how they interplay, and how collectively it really is about emotion. Even rationalism, total rationalism, is emotional acuity. You're still, so you put 100 people that all seem like the same person in one room, and you'll start to see how one person becomes more, um, like I say, when we're talking about empathy or sympathy, kinesthetics, things like this, they start to take on different behaviorisms until ultimately one's cooking. One person that you would have sworn was the most rational person, those sub traits begin to amplify, right? And so you can kind of look at it like the 100 monkey theory, right? But I don't entirely believe that. I don't think that, and I do understand it. And I just watched something the other day that reiterated what that was all about. And um, I think that on those islands there wasn't enough um, proof, even though I wouldn't just like you're trying to prove that telepathic um, information can be passed on. Yeah, definitely, we know that. Whether or not it occurred in that specific situation, I think it's broader and more pervading than that. In fact, like what's talked about, if you look at a lot of the interviews that Sean Ryan has done in reference to not just Joe McGonigal or Colonel Alexander or Eric Hecker, but if you look at or Stephen Greer or any of these people, right? By the way, yeah, I reference Stephen Greer very loosely because there is that Rockefeller um, Rothschild tie there, you know. Like you can see it when someone's compromised. And I'll end it there. And we're all compromised. And by going into these ends of yourself, you are going through what you could see as the Rosicrucian or Masonic artwork that seems very cryptic, but that is the passage of your life. You have the checkerboard, you have the black and white checkerboard that people are walking on, right? And you're going to choose a right and left path. Like when you realize, and then you look at someone who chooses a left-hand path and they're not, you would see them as rationalists and you would go, well, they're not necessarily evil, but it depends very heavily on how you were raised, right? Some people just are raised with certain religion in their lives. They never question it, but then you get into Darwin and you see how he was met with this challenging where he didn't even come out with his findings for 27 years because his wife was so influential and so important to him in his life. And then you look at eugenics, you look at his relationship, like cousin, second cousin, Galton, and you start to see the interpretation and the energetics that exist, and that I believe that these are entities. But how can you say that something isn't an entity that is infused like pain or fear? To say that fear or pain isn't an entity, someone's always experiencing it all the time. So then you look at that as harmonics and how literally you get into the areas of Cannibal's Kitchen, if you're familiar with that. You can go on Last Messages. I don't know if they take his stuff off all the time. Last Messages. The harvesting of adrenochrome, keeping the pain factor going. From Gnostic traditions, looking at the elementals, little children that are sacrificed over and over again in different lifetimes and are never allowed to grow up. Yeah, you have to look critically at very uncomfortable subjects and know that as you're sitting in that room, sitting on that coffee, walking. So no, I'm not talking about or letting go of things in a blase sort of manner, banal. I don't live or see anything ever as being just commonplace or banal. I'm always faced with this, right? The reality of this. And there's even a challenge to your own physiology where it's like, no, I'm not in a heightened state of alertness to where I'm hyper vigilant as a reaction. You get over that after a while. The left brain amygdala can only grow so much in that reactive state. Your body will, when your brain histamine levels, you know, um, producing histidine reach an epic state, your blood brain barrier will balance back out. In other words, Stockholm syndrome sets in, gaslighting becomes mainstay. And that's the scary thing, is that we've all gotten used to that. We have been conditioned and we live in the midst of Stockholm. We are being gaslighted. And the fact that we don't see it is extremely scary, don't you think? All right. I'll look out for you in the future. I really appreciate you bearing with me. Surprised anybody's on there, but the subject matter is captivating, right? And so, Nathaniel Gillis, if you haven't looked him up, I'm not saying he's the end all, that he's the prophet and the Messiah. In fact, a lot of this, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you, Kinetic. I got that right? Um, so if you like to talk about things, I can invite you on for a live stream. We could even plan it. Don't have it's like, this seems like a really rude thing to say too, and I've tried to tell people this. You and I don't need to know each other in a sense physically or ever meet, because the telepathic aspect of what we share here, by you even saying that to me and then me responding to you, there's an open airway. We're already um, going through locution on such a high level, right? that is the tradition that we should be living in always. That should be where we live always, right? But am I killing off like the Matrix? Are we killing? So you look at all of the genetic flaws, CRISPR, and you see that your mom wouldn't exist. Like you may be a constant in the universe because there's that spiritual aspect of a self. You can't use any other term but spirituality. And to say that you are an identity, you have autonomy, and therefore you have always been and always will be. You've bent, like your personality has bent to this for the long, to the point where it's not intellect, and you know that you are craving that resonance. And I'm not the God to that. Like people in the past that talked about this would franchise on this, try to sell you books, sell you a course, do this. There's so many people out there, right? So many people are talking about the same thing. So that's where I get into, I have real issues with people like Billy Carson, right? He's regurgitating this and putting it out, but at the same time, somebody's got to be talking about it, right? And it's like for every, like there used to be adages that were said like, there's like a sucker born every second or whatever. It's like someone might buy a course, go through this metanoia as a result, become challenged, but we go back to this crux of comfort where we only take those principles so far in the introduction or the induction of these principles. And you will see, and I know that you know this, you will see interference. You will see that once you try to live pure and become your best self, that those people who seemed like they were for you in your life, flying monkeys as they're called, from a narcissistic, malignant narcissistic perspective, that you become enemy number one. They want to take you out, from your mother to your brother to the people you work with, society at large. Just walking down the street trying to be an autonomous individual, you become target number one. Peace to you. And I have been taking notes. I always like to do yep. And I encourage that, because you'll find, just like when I used to be a personal trainer, I would talk about these subjects that I would study, and they'd be like, this guy's full of shit. And it's like, so this is the thing, get back to me and be like, I thought you said this. I tried to look it up. I don't know if it was your mispronunciation or whatever, but this sounds like something I'd really like to look up. I'll reiterate that, and I'll even try to do research for you, because your soul matters. It's the building up of your soul that matters. Am I using a reference of soul from a Christian theological perspective? Perhaps. Perhaps. I don't know. I don't have any other word for it. But I know that monad and John Dee's discourse on the hieroglyphic monad is extremely important, because it gives us the continuity of a structure. I'm going to say a structural energetics that you can't remove emotion from, and that the emotions are our Merkaba control mechanism to this harmonic perfection phi producing machine. I'm saying phi because PHI, right? But it's also been pronounced phi, right? And it does get into that. That's where I left off as a trainer. I would walk around with the Adonis index. I would train my clients for the Adonis index. You take your wrist circumference times 6.5, you get your perfect chest measurement, hip to waist, and you go about doing that. And I got to this point where I was able to produce this. I started to understand how the implications, direct implications to insulin, glucagon, amino acids. Like I would take in a certain amount of amino acids every single hour, and I would walk with that Adonis index to the point where I became so aesthetic, right, in the way that I would train,
that I started to bring a certain energy where people think that you are some sort of, they see this phi or phi formulation and then they want something to lust after. And that's the whole point. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's not to put down people, put down a select class of people, right? It's not doing that at all. What I'm saying is if you were to look at someone who had perfect skin, perfect body balance, you have been conditioned, even if you find yourself to be the most moralistic, ethical, virtue-based human being, those are not enough. Without the principle protocol, so as a flawed human being that can never reach that sort of state, right? So I did what Brian Johnson's doing when I was his age 10 plus years ago, but I did it and actually achieved what you might consider physical perfection. But nobody's, don't get me wrong, nobody's perfect. I wasn't perfect. I don't proclaim that. It got me in a lot of trouble. But I'm going to tell you the weird thing about it is that once you reach the physical state, it's very much like the Masonic traditions of creating the perfect joint system. Why Hiram Abiff was supposedly put through, the he was the master architect. He understood it. He was killed because by these brothers, right? And that's kind of scary, right? Where you have this God who is standing alone, right? You could get into Thoth, you could get into the Sumerian traditions, you could get into Hermes Trismegistus, you could get into these areas of perfection and then the formulation of this. But if, I'm telling you that if you do one thing to perfection, right, down to the corridors of perfection, you will begin to see an interplay that becomes you display a phi or phi signature harmonics that cannot be denied, and you will see coming out of nowhere. I almost don't want to talk about this because, like, I believe that you, in your pursuits and your interest in this, can achieve this. You might be really inclined toward mathematics. You might see things in that way where you have this, scientific, but there's an area that each of us, right, are given through the resonance of our genetics, of our DNA, where somehow, some way, with all the flaws, all the genetic junk in our DNA information, once we're firing, once that flow is, that conductivity is fired up, right? And you're able to go into kind of this coitus in conversation, this dialogue with yourself, and know the intricacies of all your weaknesses, all the patterns that sabotage you and get in the way. And you kind of see why I stay in here. Like, it's like I stay on the trajectory. I don't need any outside interference. I don't need any feedback that's going to sabotage and challenge that. And once you get into this discourse with yourself, you're going to see that those heightened states of perfection that are found in your DNA, in your genetics, right? That, and I think it takes place with uracil, right? Where you go through that, you go through that genetic. I understand having a whole body is important for that resonance, as in, I'm kind of blind, so your writing is good. In no circumcision and no, yep. And I lost teeth, right? Through bad dental, yeah. And that you're talking about the Meriden or torsion field energy and how that is all connected. And that, yes, like the Vitruvian man, we resonate that energy. And once you meet that, I'm going to tell you, even when you're missing teeth, right? Even when you've been circumcised, even when they've messed with you, right? So why do they circumcise us? I'm going to be crude here, but I'm not trying to be. So that the tip of your member rubs against the clothing that you are forced to wear, and that you have to be desensitized. When you're a kid, you feel weird about it, right? You forget about that memory as a child and how they broke into the parameters of yourself. So that's one way of looking at it, is taking you into this heightened state of eroticism, right? To where the energies are no longer in a purified state, right? That skin has been removed, right? So I look at the obvious nature of things, and then sure enough, the answer is given to you. Why did they have modern dentistry when we could heal the area and we never had to have our teeth drilled into? We never had to lose teeth in the first place, right? So look at this. They're things that are done to you, and they're things that are done to you deceptively by a society that you were taught to trust, right? So who is running society? This kakistocracy. And it's like, you are, I am. It's being run by we the people. It's just that it becomes easier for us, right? Here we are shopping at stores. You have the answer. You know that it's autonomy. Why aren't you exercising that autonomy? Go.
Yeah, my earbuds are running out here. Go kill your own animal. Go go get your own chicken. And then you start to see the moral implications of that. That you have just murdered an animal. And so then there is the patting over of, oh, you're not going to worry about that, right? Like, you're being overly sensitive, right? You're you're infusing your own moral judgments on this, and it's like when you get back into your meditation, when you do, I've been told quite frankly by spiritual leaders, people literally who they're, this one guy, his parents owned all these mosques. He came up to me and he goes, you have very powerful spiritual energy. This is like 15, 20 years ago, and you need to stop eating meat, right? So there's the personalization of something like that where the ego's involved and you go, wow, that's true. I am really special. And then you might see the guy, if you have an inquisitive nature, you might see that guy go up and talk to 20 other people and say the same thing, right? So how gullible are you? How much hubris do you require to where that's your end? Now you've defined the distance. And I believe this. I believe that time and distance can be measured. I think these things can be measured. I would like to get to the point where I don't eat anything. Yeah, exactly. You're eating something that has gone through samsara, right? That feels pain. Yeah. And I'd like to get to the same place. But I made this point on a live the other day, and it is, and this is not a release from, like, once we say statements like this, you're now not released from liability. No, you are knowingly eating animals. It's the most, and even the processing of it, it's the most disgusting thing in the world. But to get back to the point is, you know, are you going to go as far as the matrix and this amino acid paste? Well, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I've lived on nothing but protein powder for weeks at a time. Yeah, that used to be something that I practiced. Yeah. Yeah, hypocritical, exactly. So once you pull that string, right, we're only given so much string in a lifetime. But I believe that you can, through mental mind meditations, you can work past this. But I'm going to tell you that once you go into, you will be given a gift that looks like you have this extension toward youth, vitality, and life, right? When you sell out, right? When you begin to purify, and when you really take this seriously and you realize, you know, I have to eat what I eat, and I have to do what I'm doing, and I have to hope and place my hope in a future where technology is being used in such a way where I can get all the nutrients from an orthomolecular nutrition stamp. That was something that else I talked about. Billy J. Saley, Heal with Amino Acids. She's since passed away. the term orthomolecular nutrition, orthomolecular sciences were grabbed onto, and it was taken up by the pharmaceutical industry and used under a completely different narrative where it wasn't about healing. In the 90s, the late 90s, it became illegal to make such claims in the supplement industry that 100% is part and parcel to your healing. And if we were taught these things, we would see how easy it is. Thomas Deleuze's channel, that's why I don't try to do anything like that, because I'm like, wow, what a great channel. The guy's coming out with top research information. But if you read about orthomolecular nutrition, just living on the whey protein, MC2 oil, yeah, I did that. I stayed completely shredded, but I did it in my early 30s. And when I say completely shredded, I was personal training. I realized that I had to be billable, right? I had to represent something in order to get clients and so forth. But then you get into this dichotomy where you are becoming, like, there's a critical aspect of hypocrisy. Like, how influential do I need to be? And in order to, so it's like you could say, well, you're off the hook. You earned it. You made the money. You were doing all the studies. But the whole reason that they were attracted to working with me as a personal trainer was because aesthetically, I was attractive, right? I was like, by the eye, you could see the dimensions and all this. Attractive in the sense that to males, they want to like sort of look like that. But then you internalize it and you go, they want to look like me. And then you miss the whole point that you're practicing principles. And this is how important principles are. The principles are manifesting such things, right? We should never get to the point where we see a package, and Nietzsche gets into this, you know, when he talks about this sort of boutique society that cropped up, you know, Germany, right? Where they reached this critical point of aesthetics, right? This is the height of the whole enlightenment, like what came out of it was like by you become a sellout, and I didn't have to let go of this. I was aesthetically able to reproduce that every single day, and it created this money system. And then people start to worship you as if, because there's an attractive quality to you, they start to worship you. It's like natural for people to worship others. Like, so when you're insecure and you're raised with no real self-esteem, this gets back into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You are going to want to be like, have you ever seen Rael, that whole thing where he talks about a lot of these things, and he created a religion based on that. And then these people become corrupt. And it's like, no, I don't want to be a spiritual leader. I believe you can lead yourself. And I think that's what the discourse that we're talking about is, that areas that I've studied and areas where I'm not really all that well versed, you can go in and look at a myriad of other people, and then you start to purposefully think about this in your own environmental solution of your own sphere. And you realize that maybe if you understand how to create the perfect practicum that's going to create that phi aesthetic Fibonacci sequence, Adonis index, for lack of a better display of physicality, that maybe the smart thing to do is to dial back, right? Dial back. Eat something that puts a little bit more fat on you. Maybe not work a certain area on purpose, but keep it, you know, like, don't focus on building the shoulders up so much, right? Don't focus on doing those Mazur type exercises, right? You're not trying to get the affirmation. Like, people, once people are no longer the eye of your beholder, once they are not your God anymore, right? once you are not satisfied by I must be worshiped and praised, once you realize that everybody doing this, right? Everybody spinning this Merkaba of not only physical. So now it gets scary, right? You get into what was going on World War II. You get into vril energy. Another thing you'd like to look up, I think, that you'd have interest in is Indian ink and eloptic energy. Look that up. Religion, when I talk about Free Palestine, I don't know enough about those subjects, and I never will make a statement about things that I'm not familiar with, but I think free everyone. Free everyone. No one should be living in a prison. Nobody should be held captive within their own body, right? And so when I talk about like a male or a masculine force, I don't remove somebody like Ayn Rand, who I have a lot of reverence and respect for. In fact, that was really the only book that I could complete when I was really young, and that I listened to that on tape. I saw it. It was like I was able to read that, and I didn't understand such references or inferences of edicts, right? That she saw, again, the perfect analogy is Blood Meridian, the judge. She saw very clearly what that toxic male energy stood for, right? That Masonic energy, that authoritarian energy, that short-sighted man of hubris, how dangerous that is, right? But then, so I'm weird where I really see the perspective of conservatives. Yeah, I completely see wokeism too. Like, I see what's going on there. I see the rally, the volley of energy and information, and I'm like, when you ask me about the simulation, holographic universe, yeah, Donald Trump lives in his own simulation, his own holographic universe. What he represents is important to the time because he is displaying what somebody with that much hubris, right? That much short-sighted confidence will produce in the steam of their own energy. And so too, when you take the most woke person who's dressing up, as, in rainbow, in the whole garb, reading library books to children, that if the exposure to that leads you away, like in Hindu philosophy or religion, the third sex is implied. Well, you could see that as, oh, the third sex. Well, I could, like, if I'm liberated, I'm going according to this whole Statue of Liberty, right? If I'm liberated, well, that means a free-for-all. I can go into orgies. I can, live in the most hedonistic sort of way. And it's like, then you will be met with, this gets into Michel Foucault and his interpretation of what Nietzsche was talking about. Nietzsche had a lot more Schopenhauer in him than I think, but I don't want to speak for Michel Foucault, but he took it into this homosexual sadomasochistic display of defiance and liberation from himself, right? He was going through the full discourse and the destruction of Dostoevsky's Underground Man. He was burning himself like an effigy at the stake and going, like, if you look at Michael Segru's take on Michel Foucault, you have this person, and he said this straight out, is that he believed that the soul was being held captive in the body, and that the soul wasn't something that needed to be built up, that the body is who you are, and that the body, the physicality, the corporeal had to be. So when you look at that, it's kind of like, well, what's the difference than what I'm talking about? If you are exposing the body to a pure soul energy, and the body is being forced from its pre-inclination to sin, and I do believe the body is a sin suit. I don't think it could be seen any other way. I think we live within the challenge of a sin suit on purpose, and that there is a challenge of you can either be this is who you can be. You can fall back on your laurels, you can fall back to a default, or you can aspire to the higher man. You can aspire to the higher that's beyond or ideology, that's beyond that doesn't have a shelf. Like, I believe that. I believe profoundly that there is no end. There's no end in your development. There's no end in my development. And there's no end in the transitory aspect of that. Yeah, that's what I firmly believe. The outer man, yeah, the outer man and the inner man. Yes. So, like, if you want to look this up, you might be interested in Carl Jung, right? Jung, and the animus, the anima and the animus. And, but something else that I believe is that the musician, the comedian, the thespian, the reason that it's such so important to not only delineate but to break into the confines of the harmonics, right, of what this person is, the philosopher, the scientist. I believe that there is this Atlantean, say Lemurian concept where there, you could even look at it, look further into this with Neoplatonism, Stoicism, Pythagorean theorem, right? You could almost get into the idea that a society that respected the cultivation of you as this amazing form of existence, and that every animal and every living thing, in fact, knowing full well that everything has a consciousness, right? And that consciousness isn't something that we cap or we franchise upon, but that we are supposed to resonate that in truth out to everything. We're supposed to be the instructors and the teachers to everything and anything that comes, that not even across our path, that we get into this place where there's this evolution into a God. But that once you look at yourself in the mirror and you go, I'm a God, you're done. So then you think about the fact that if there is a main hub to a selfless self, right? The monad, the sun that just shines, it doesn't look in a mirror. It's not enthralled with itself. It doesn't have any investment in ego, right? But it is the healthiest ego because it is producing, right? And so, again, it gets into the areas of discourse where I talk about principles. They're my principles. They're how I interpreted it. I am not, you see how easily people could be seen as, cult leaders or spiritual leaders. If I were to talk about this, and I did do that. I got to a place where I became corrupt. I'm going to be quite frank with you. But that was metanoia. I'm still here. You see what I'm saying? Don't you see the beauty of it? No multers or demons took me out. Yeah, they wanted to gobble me up. I was challenged by it. I got to this place, man, where I was doing. I'll be right back because I have to use the restroom. But this, I've taken this. Cries of the carrots. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna go use the restroom real quick. I'll be right back.
So TMI, I know, but that was a comically longest piss I've ever taken in my entire life. Okay. All right. So I'm going to tell you something. And I usually use, I've been using these live streams and video, you know, trying to videotape myself. I think videotape is doing a digital capture to be able to almost therapeutically talk about the experiences that I had with mental mind manipulations. And the fact that I know that I've taken things beyond any, and this sounds like a lot of, but I've taken, I needed to know. I needed to know. I needed to know what was going on. And so when we're faced with, so if you are given certain parameters, you can be the type of person who looks at every parameter and says, rules were made to be broken, or I'm going to be goody two shoes. I'm going to follow along with it because I know that if I use the greatest amount of virtue, deeds, morality, master morality, like you can get into the discourse with Machiavellianism, right? Or you get into the master morality or the slave morality, right? But all of that is fine and dandy until you get to the place where you have a personal, it's very personal. It has to do with your energy. You can't fake authenticity. And so something that I like to say is that's just the road I came in on, right? I usually do that with my left hand because there's a difference between the left and right. And anytime you hear physicists talking about like a chiral energy, it's undeniable that there is a multiple timeline and there's multiple energy systems that are at work in play, and that when you unify yourself with that, and I'm going to use the term mimetic sequencing. Okay, so how I use that term is you've got 181 amino acids. You have a microfraction. And you can trick your pituitary, right? So you look at the HPTA, you can trick your pituitary into excreting signals sent off through the hypothalamus to say that growth hormone is already present, it's already there, and therefore we need to produce more, right? And so it gets into areas that have been referred to through the studies of insulin growth factors, mechanofactors, things like this, things of this nature, right? But the fact that if that exists in the human body, you postulate and you take this type of thing where you're going, well, isn't that how religion works? Isn't that how society works as a general construct? Aren't we being indoctrinated in such a way where they're just giving us the first ribbon of that code, right? And I do mean ribbon in the way of like lives of a cell, you know, when you look at ribosomes and stuff, because once there is enough information, so I don't believe that this ends at genetics, at genetic information or, you know, endocrine responses. I believe that this is part and parcel to what's going on in these programs, not only Joe McGonigal type things, you know, where you're looking at these men who stare at goats, but once there's an inference, let's see, even the way light acts as a part, yeah, or a wave, depending if it's being observed or not. Yes, exactly, like the double slit experiment. So, but I think that is a very I think that I don't think there's any information. I think you're supposed to take that information and you're supposed to interpret it. I believe everything is supposed to be digested and interpreted to its full extent. And what they call this is like a doxastic point of view, where you're looking at it in a multi-dimensional, multi-layered fashion. It's not just A and B like they try to give us, 1, 2, 3, where you're able to choose between these things. So, uh, so there's an idea that subparticles are going through a transitional stage where the only reason you could call an electron, proton, photon, even getting neutron, you could look at it like quarks, up, down, top, bottom, charm, strange, right? That there must be a minimum number, but even in that minimum number, that like the monad, that's how profound the monad is that is there a reducibility into one? Are we talking about the energetics of a singular system, right? And what happens is when you look at monotheism, when you look at monad, it's like mono, you have this one. And in democracy and liberty, right, you have the idea of many, right? And you get into the idea from, from a biblical sense of legion, right? Demons, and the fact that you have these different flavors, and therefore to get away from the boredom, the banal aspect of having principles. Like there are those, the gospel of truth, where Jesus says, he talks about the jars, and interesting how these codices were found in jars as well. But I digress. But he talks about these jars in the gospel of truth. You could go on the Gnostic archives. They used to be free and available. Sorry, a lot of that stuff isn't available anymore. The internet's completely different than it used to be. You get into the aspect of the Wild West, and you see, how cryptocurrency, um, like they misuse and manipulate that. They make something that could be a beautiful thing, right? 21 million Bitcoin, about 18.5 million in circulation. Some say even less, but you get into this area where value comes just from the use, the application, the storage, and the fact that it has a finite supply. It gets into a market cap, but fungibility and so forth. But you get into this area where you see that Jesus talks about these jars that are flawed, that they're made flawed, that they were flawed from their origin. And so he also talks and references not only just in the Nag or Nag Hammadi or the Dead Sea Scrolls, but he talks about how all things go back into their, it's not really things, right? It's like all energy basically goes back into its roots, the root that it comes from, right? Even the way, yeah. Shiloh, did you say? Explain that to me, just so I understand. But and shalom, I'm thinking, my brain kind of breaks down wordage, but that there are those who are made flawed. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll look that up. I appreciate it. Let me take a screen capture of that. Do I think that there's something wrong with using the term Jesus? I think your intent is the most important thing, but I think the manipulation, that if that is a Masonic name, right? If that name has had ritualistic witchcraft, fellow craft, whatever craft you want to, that stuff is real, man. That stuff's real. If you get into the fact that may have happened, I believe that your intention, right, that if you don't have to go into the discourse with other people who are on the fringe, and so if you haven't developed your idea or concepts of Jesus and have a personal relationship with the pure Son, in other words, it doesn't matter what you call Jesus, and especially if you're a female, you don't necessarily have to see it as a man, but it is the masculine force of energy within you. It's just as resounding within the female as the male. It is the male energy, but it's not the toxic male energy. Like all things that are linear, you could say just the shape of testosterone, right? But then you get into this circuitous or circumductive aspect of like the idea of Clotho and the three witches of spinning time, right? Is the fact that we don't want to fall back on our laurels again, where we look at things like we want to get comfortable. There's nothing comfortable about this, but the comfort comes from transcendence, right? When we are in transcendence and we are in growth, then there is nothing to worry about, right? So I don't have problems with people using different terms, but I'm going to look that up. Shiloh, is it pronounced Silo or Shiloh? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt. You know, Hail Zeus. I mean, that's something that's been talked about for quite a while. Michael Tsarian really got into this type of thing. Billy Carson is talking about this. It's been talked about for a long time, you know. Shalom. Yeah, and the H is a very powerful letter. And it's why it's used, you know, in Hebrew, obviously, but it's the energetics of the H, and the H being like this block sort of energy. So I did something where I was looking at the letters of the alphabet, and I was trying to think about them in terms of a multi-dimensional perspective. So at first I had made a capital A, and then I'd made another capital A and another capital A, and I'm like, that looks like a radiating sun, right? Then I went on to B, and I'm like, okay, I'll write the B, I'll do it in reverse, top, bottom. Those are the four principles that are shown over and over again, right? The C, right? Very interesting. So you start to look at the energetics of it. Then if you could go even further as to think, what if this was in a sphere, and these they weren't only just spinning from a two-dimensional type perspective, but there were protrusions, you know, convex concave idea, right? It gets back into non-Euclidean spherical mathematics. So there's energetics around words, right? And word usage, and that somewhere somebody is doing rituals with these. Yeah, Yeshua. I like that too. That's kind of like what I would use as Yeshua. And the why, it is the male or masculine form of energy. I'd say that's the perfect descriptor, that the masculine form of energy is linear, and it's to get things done, but it's not exclusively male, right? And I think that's something that people have a hard time with. And again, I would use Ayn Rand as a very good example of that. Her writing, her abilities in philosophy, her you know, there's a lot of respect going on there, you know. And I think that female philosophers, well, like Frankenstein, you know, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that's an epic book. In some ways, that's maybe equally or even more profound than Moby Dick, which I did read more than once, and it's a tough read to get through. But it really gets into it's complex, and to talk about it, like I say, Tom DeLure, he knows his stuff on exercise science, nutritional science. Even though I understand a lot of these themes, let's listen to him. As far as philosophy and philosophical breakdown, Michael Segru, he just passed away last month. He was a master. And by the way, my son told me this. I haven't found anything that backs this up, but he told me that Michael Segru became Christian near the end of his life. So, yeah. So I would say that I'm more Christian than the average capitalistic, person who calls themselves a fundamentalist Christian. It's like it's a personal walk, right? But I think that understanding the profound aspect of what the pure sun is, the fact that even if you don't believe in the pure sun, but like let's say from a genetic CRISPR standpoint, someone had to come close, right? Like let's take some genetic strands, and if AI was capable of reproducing genetics for the last, I don't know, it's always being stretched out as far as how long humanity, like let's say for the last 200,000 years, right? And let's look at the perfect genetic information. So to liberate ourselves from so you have to look existentially at behaviorism and so forth, but that's not where you would begin to fashion the perfect um, representation of. So it gets very deeply back into Nietzsche and the spiritual man, right? Or Dostoevsky's. There's a spiritual man that emerges. It's not the most physically strongest. It's not the best looking. It's not the most intellectual. We see what happens is where people are given a certain lifespan, they're given a certain continuity of energy, but they're all pretty much given the same length string. And once you pull that string too far one way, it's just going to shorten on the other side. I think that's a perfect analogy, right? So it's kind of like you have to work with what you're given. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So you have to work with what you're given, but you work with it in such a way. Hmm. Yeah. So Easter rabbits, Christmas. So Easter rabbits, that's the 5 Fibonacci sequence, right? That's what Fibonacci did. He was trying to see the reproducibility and the replication of the rabbits and how that might postulate out into a mathematical formula. And then lo and behold, you get into that Fibonacci, which is the phi or phi formulation. Christmas, the pagan ritual of cutting down the tree, that goes back to the mighty tree of your what was that called? But it was like there is like stellium 7 gets into this where there were these massive trees that were cut down, not only giants, not only titans, huge like elephant type creatures, massive, but there was there's signs that there was a massive forest that at one time, how long ago that was. You look at like the Decinovian, the Carboniferous. You look at these moments in time, right? And you start to see implications on that. It's phallic symbol as well. So fertility, the tree, yes. You get back into the fractals, you get back into the Fibonacci sequence, you get into sacred geometry, and you start to see how the tree best represents that, right? But then, like you're saying, a phallic symbol, you also see those phallic symbols emerge, not only in the ways of, totems, right? But in government, all around the world throughout history at different times. But anyway, I'm going to fry up some meat, and here I am. I'm a hypocrite. I want to get to the point where I no longer am that hypocrite, I've tried doing other things and it just has left me empty. I've done vegan and vegetarian diet. It's extremely expensive and it's very hard to do. it takes a great amount of fortitude to focus on that. But is it impossible? No. But I would have to get into an area in a place in my life where I could focus 100% on the cultivation of sprouted foods and nutrients, and to get enough amino acids. So what is that critical state where I'm getting enough nutrients, I'm provided with enough nutrients to be my best self, right? And I'm also practicing principles, right? From a fundamental perspective of I'm practicing these in the way that I'm doing. I don't not eat meat because I'm trying to be a better person. Eventually, through transition of the soul energies throughout lifetimes, perhaps, I forget about eating meat ever. I never look at an animal like, I want to kill that and eat it, And I believe that we've reached a state, it may seem tacky. You may think this is trailing off to Atlantis and Lemuria and all this stuff, but I believe that we reached a state at a time where we had produced and reproduced these perfect harmonics where no one with any sort of mental acuity issues was ever born, that there were no flaws in genetics, and that we may have resembled each other in such a striking way that entrance into the Garden of Eden with the serpent, the snake, Satan, if you will, that I think that this gets into the cultivation and hybrid sex slaves that leads directly into Babylon, like modern day Iraq and so forth. And it gets into the areas where what we find attractive, is it's not only the food and the idea, the concept of food and hedonism that corrupts us, but that we're craving the flesh, that we live within these sin suits that are fashioned from and partially made from something that we feel it's disquieting. We feel uncomfortable about it. And I believe that we can get to that place and that transcendence can, should, and there's no reason why it shouldn't occur, It's felt like I've done that type of thing. Yeah, I've lived that way where I got into doing amino acids every single hour. I did this for years. And what invariably happens is you get much thinner than you think you would, but then you start to understand how even the, like, when you look at the BMI of 19 or 20 and you think that's thin, I think that people would naturally be about a 15 to 17 BMI, that we would be very, very thin creatures. I've been my weight right now, I weigh about 159 pounds. I'm a little over 6 feet tall. I've been at that weight and gone into the gym, and this is by no means, because it took me years of building this up. I would go in and curl 85, 90-pound dumbbells for reps. I'm not saying that it didn't do its toll. It was the exact opposite thing of what I should have been doing. I should have been doing more human kinesthetic, kinesiology-based biomechanical movement patterns, but or bench pressing 3-4 times your body weight. All those things are possible. I guess my reason for bringing that up is that it doesn't impact strength relative to your body weight, right? But you're not going to go, you're like Eddie Hall or something, or you're not going to go deadlift 1,200 pounds, right? So we get into these areas of grandiosity and human potential, but I also am not putting that down. Like, there is something that happens with field energy when we break the norms, when we break certain standards, but I also think that is an excuse for this on-running program to keep going and doing what it does. Is that it's like, look, you see, there's democracy, there's liberty, there's somebody who can eat 10,000 calories a day, weigh 400 pounds, right, and do these human achievements, right? But you also have to ask yourself. So I believe in a relativity that's occurring there with our body, what we're supposed to be based on our bone structure. And so when you see someone who falls outside the norm of who they are and what they were born to be and do, yeah, he's someone like Eddie Hall. He's training at the upper limits, but how big did he have to get? How far outside the scope of his own homeostatic phi resonance did he have to go to do that, right? It's an achievement in hubris, and there is no achievement in ego. The expression of ego, it serves nothing, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Karuchi, Madaki, OCB. I will take a picture of this and look this up. I really appreciate your thought-inspired comments. If you're here, yes, bro, you're wrong. About what in specific? Oh, you're talking about, let me go back and read that. It's phallic. Explain yourself. Not putting you on the spot. I'm just saying, this is an open dialogue. I'm only running my mouth because you're not here, but I would be, do you know Junior? I'm sorry, I'm so blind. Junior, I can't say that I do, but maybe I do. Is that how you spell it? NTR? I'll look that up. Let me take another quick picture here. What does Junior talk about? Interesting stuff. Yeah, I love the perspective, and I don't think anyone's wrong about anything. Like, I don't mean to offend on either side, but I think that I'm going to start cooking up a burger and completely contradict myself. But I have lived that way where I've done, whey protein. I was even trying to get to this place where I was doing non-animal based products. I very much believe in that, and I think that we could be producing a very superior amino acid. He is a hero in Hollywood industry. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't know about that person, but I will look it up. And I think that I don't think anybody's wrong ever, and I think that's both a problem, but an area of discovery where a certain sphere of thought is taken on to a certain level of completion. I'm sure you would agree, none of us complete any thought or anything that we do to the extent that we should. And with that said, yeah, pea protein, I almost bought some. I was looking at the now pea protein, and it's it's still like $52 for 7 pounds. I've tried doing just the protein recently like I used to.
And my blood sugar, I can't do it. I can't do it. I also do a lot. I train a lot. I walk a lot. I was doing 80 miles a week up until just a few days ago. So how do we meet the higher demand, and at the same time get in what we need. I think that we're capable of producing something to the effect that is produced with orthomolecular nutrition and sciences in mind, where we get everything that we need. But even more so, where I see technology going is the fact that we won't need to eat it all one day, that those constituents can be stored in our bodies and recombinated, right? Through nano technologies, but it'll get into areas that I was talking about earlier with insulin growth factors, mechanofactors, ghrelin produced, natural responses that we have with GHRPs and things like this, samorelin. But anyway, I'm very hungry. I'm gonna get going, but man, yeah, that's why I wish that people could talk about things to where I could just, like, you could say, I'd like to come on, right? And then I'd be able to just invite you on, and then you could talk about it. It's really hard to beat whey protein. Yeah, it is. And so what I do is, like, I'll make a so being on keto carnivore, I will often make a custard out of 3 eggs. And yeah, there's never a time where I mention eating meat or eggs where I don't feel uncomfortable saying it. There's never a time. And I might mention it all through the day, every day. So I'll do like 3 eggs, 3/4 a scoop of whey protein. You mix it up. You put about a cup of water in with that. You turn your oven on to 350 Fahrenheit. You put it in for 35 minutes. You come back and you have perfectly cooked custard. Then I'll get into using stuff like swerve and, erythritol, monk fruit, and allulose. But only recently did I start adding in those sweeteners. It was only when I got under 160 pounds. Yeah. And then you can make ice cream very easily. I made some last night. You can make ice cream bars. These pork skins, you mix the pork skin. It sounds disgusting, but they almost have no flavor. You mix the pork skins with cinnamon and the allulose sugar or the brown sugar swerve, which has no calories, right? And to make the ice cream, all you have to do is you do the same exact thing. You use 3/4 scoop of your choice of protein with about a cup, say a cup. You're just making an individual serving of heavy cream. If you're on keto carnivore, you blend that or shake it to the point where it thickens. Put it in the freezer for a half hour. Take it out, stir it. It almost looks like a soft serve ice cream after only 30-35 minutes. Stir it, break up those ice crystals, put it back in for 15 minutes, and you have ice cream essentially. And then I'll top it with that, where I'll top it with the pork skin, cinnamon, which helps regulate your blood sugar, and sweetener. And then you can make bars out of it where you just wrap it in plastic wrap. You could put like a fork or some sort of, if you have skewers or a stick on there, and make individual ice cream out of that. And the end result is the pork skins, once you refreeze them, it tastes like this decadent, so it gives it substance, gives it substance. But I think you'd be surprised. Yeah, it's really good. All right. Peace be with you. I hope to talk to you soon. And it'd be nice to, go down on the comments after I publish this and give me a link to your channel or send me a link that I can watch, because it sounds like you're really interested in this, and I'd like to hear more about what your areas of study are. We all do have one.